Feel empty? Like something is missing? Fantasia helps the disenchanted become enchanted by inspiring them to become conscious, holistic creators who dance with life. Each week we explore new ideas that expand consciousness, increase love, and enhance magical awareness. Now, here's your host, Laura Giles.
I took a creative writing class once, and the instructor said that a good story always begins with the ending. I thought about that, and it makes sense. If you want your story to end somewhere, it definitely makes it easier to consciously create a path there, right? Well, I think the same thing applies to your life. If you want to consciously create your life, you have to know how the story ends. Of course, we don't have total control over that, but we do have control over our funeral and burial. We can plan for that. I've been talking about dying and death because fall is the season of dying and death, and we're almost to the threshold of the new year. My new year starts with the return of the sun in the winter solstice. So I'm thinking about how I want this year to end, what I want to release and not take into the new year and commit to some new things. Nobody has to end anything. But if we don't let go of the things when their time has come, it starts to become a burden. It slows us down and gets us off track. So I like to die when it's time, and I'm preparing for crossing that threshold and starting again. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Laura Giles, host of Fantasia, and we talk about how to live a conscious life full of magic and wonder. It's not a fantasy of escapism and rose-colored glasses. I think it's a wonderful blend of groundedness and practicality mixed with lighthearted love, peace, inspiration, and sugar and spice. Can we have a funeral that's all those things? I mean, aren't funerals expensive, handled by professionals, set in funeral homes, and kind of a high pressure, high guilt, kind of in and out affairs? Well, that's how a lot of them are done today, but is that how you want yours to be? That's what today's podcast is about. Be sure you stay to the end because I assure you that I'm going to give you some things to think about as far as your final disposition that you haven't thought about before. Okay. I went to a funeral of a client and it was a whirlwind. It was like, drop everything. Someone has died. We're viewing tomorrow in the middle of the day, and it's a private funeral. So you can't come, but that's it. Goodbye. That's your goodbye. Figure out your emotions on your own. There's no time to process, to take in anything, to do anything. And after it was over, it was almost like it never happened. And that's not a good thing. A life is a precious thing, a wonderful thing, and it deserves to be seen, honored, and shared. And it felt like this person was just erased. I went to another funeral that was very similar. It was super quick. There was a viewing at the funeral home. The atmosphere was cold and sterile. There's no personality, and it was a sleek, clean, contemporary room, which is nice, but definitely not homey or warm. People said some words, and then it was over, and it felt very abrupt. There was nothing bad about it, but I didn't feel that the process gave a sense of a rite of passage. There was no closure or even the proper time to appreciate the life that was gone. I mean, whether a person lives 10 days, 30 years, or 85, their presence makes an impact. It takes a while to wrap your head around that and get the whole feel of the love and the life that that person created and all that they contributed, and then to unwind it all and let it go. I went to another funeral that was huge. There were 2 viewings at the funeral home, and each was packed with a lot of people, and I heard a lot of stories. People came from very far away to be here, but that made it even more of a whirlwind, but in a different kind of way. There was so much to take in, so many emotions, stories, and different facets of the deceased that there was no way to process it all. And then it was all over, and it felt like I was in shock the entire time. This was a young person. Actually, all the funerals that I've talked about so far were young people. The deaths were unexpected and high-stress events. In all 3 cases, the mother was the one handling everything. The tension level was very high. I would even say that it rose to the level of emotional overwhelm because It's not only that she had to deal with the logistics of the funeral, she was also dealing with the loss of her child. Now, things had to be done now. There are permits to get, papers to sign, death certificates to deal with, and transportation to arrange. So you don't get the leisure of comparing options or thinking about it. I know in one of these cases, the funeral was ready to take place and the undertaker was asking for more money. It was a lot of money. They wouldn't proceed until everything was paid for. I'm not saying this was wrong. I don't know the details, but it does feel pretty horrible to hear that story. The last funeral was $40,000, and it wasn't particularly fancy. I think it got that high because of pressure, guilt, no pre planning, and not knowing what the options were and not having the time to give anything any real thought. And imagine what it's like for the person who has to make all the arrangements and deal with the finances and all the people in their emotions. I mean, they're the host or hostess. I don't really know how anyone does that in a traditional 3 days. Even if there's a lot of support from the family, it's a lot. But did you know that you don't have to go out that way? Nobody does. Home funerals are legal. And if you live in the country, you may be even able to bury your person on your own property. Yeah. Think about the thousands of dollars you could save. I just looked it up for this podcast, and statistics say that the average funeral in Virginia in 2024 cost $7,000. Add to that the average cost of a burial plot, which it says is $1,300, but I didn't see anything for that cheap. So I think both of those numbers are very low. I checked Craigslist, and the average price for a burial plot on Craigslist is $3,000. So count on $10,000 for a funeral and $4,000 for a cremation. Obviously, there's a lot of wiggle room in these prices, depending upon whether you want embalming, a cement vault, the type of casket that you choose. If you want to be placed where there's a nicer view and things like that. Do you want your loved ones to be thinking about all those decisions when you die? There's such a lot of guilt and this internal pressure to get the nicest casket, get all the bells and whistles and all the flowers, because this is the last thing you will ever do for your loved one. Things can get way out of control very easily because you're vulnerable. So please do some pre-planning. It will save whoever is in charge a lot of grief. My grandmother planned her entire funeral and paid for everything up front. She gave everything away while she was still alive. I think the only thing that had to be paid was the engraving on her headstone, because obviously they couldn't do that ahead of time because they didn't know the date. That was it. It made everything so carefree, and everyone can focus on the ritual of grieving and sending her off. So if you would like to take part in your death, why not consider a home funeral? A home funeral gets around a lot of these problems and solves some that we haven't even talked about yet. But you have to be willing to do the work. This is a hands-on affair. Your loved one will be cared for by you. That might mean that you bathe them, dress them, and decide how you want things to go. So I guess this is a good time to share how I know this and how I got into home funerals. So I'm an animist. I was born animist, which means that I have a parent who is from an animist culture. And animism just means that we believe that everything is alive, sacred, and connected. And we live that belief. And that tends to include earth honoring ways of living. If you believe that the birds, horses, oceans, and mountains are your relatives, and you live in that reciprocal relationship with them, you love them, you honor them, and they do the same, maybe you're an animist too. So natural death is just a part of life for people with that mindset. We're not separate from nature. We are nature. Well, despite that, I didn't really think about death when I was young because, like who does? But when I got older and was looking for elders to help me navigate the ways that life changes as we age, I wasn't seeing the examples that I wanted to see. See lots of old people, but not elders. An elder is someone who is wise, someone who has engaged with life and has learned from it and has wisdom to pass along. I just see people who have endured years, but aren't any wiser than they were when they were young. And I'm not talking about everyone, obviously, but I felt like the older I got, the fewer people that there were that I could look up to, and that felt very lonely. And as I was looking down that road of life, I was seeing death there at the end, and I didn't see a way to navigate that. Not that I was afraid, just that it was unknown. Well, then I saw this movie that changed my life. It's called Departures, and it's an Oscar winner. It's a Japanese movie with English subtitles, and it's about this wonderful cello player who has lost his job due to budget cuts. And he has to find other work. So he and his wife move back to his hometown where he finds work as a traditional ritual mortician. He hides this from his wife and everyone else because any association with death is unclean. It's not a profession to be proud of. And in Asian culture, you don't want to bring any shame on the family or yourself. Now, the Japanese are mainly Buddhist or Shinto. I don't know much about either, but Shintoism is an animist belief. And it appears to my ignorant eyes that this is a Shinto ritual because the idea that death being unclean and being tainted by death is absolutely an animist idea. Some Native American tribes have rituals around this. Some modern country Greeks still have rituals around this. Lots of people do. Anyway, when the hero of the story first starts his job, he's disgusted by the death too. But by engaging with death, he begins to embrace life, his community, and ritual in a deeply connected way. He starts to yearn for the honesty and intimacy that comes when you participate in life as it is and without withholding anything. Everything changes. His life now has meaning. He realizes that what he gives the families of the deceased is priceless. It's peace. It's a good death. It's closure. What he gives the departed is dignity. Dealing with death isn't something to be ashamed of or afraid of. It's a way to close the circle of life and allow life to begin again in a clean, pure way. And when I saw that, I knew that I wanted to be part of that for my own family and for my community. I wanted that option to exist for people. And since I have learned about the options for a home funeral, I can't imagine why anyone would want anything different. The family can participate in the process. This is the biggest reason for doing this. And I realized that some families might not want to do this. It might be too close for comfort, but I can tell you that it helps tremendously to be involved. Maybe you don't want to be the one to wash or dress the body. Maybe all you want to do is carry the body to the final resting place or dig the hole. That's cool. You can be as involved as you want to be. When you have a home funeral, you're not a bystander. You're a part of everything. It's not a sterile viewing in a corporate business. It's a vigil in your home. You sit in vigil during the transition time between death and burial. This transition time helps you to sit with your feelings, accept the death, comfort other people, allow yourself to be comforted by other people, to be cared for by your community and spirit. Whoever is present may want to just sit there near the body. I know I creeped some people out. When my brother died, I hugged his body. I touched him. He wasn't in a casket, so his body was easy to touch, and that helped me a lot. And I saw other people do it after I did. So I think that for some people, it helps to have the space to take their time and to access or say or do whatever needs to be done or said. You can light a candle and say a prayer. You can sing songs that were special to the two of you or sing a hymn. You could read scripture or poetry or something that was meaningful to you. Read a letter that you wrote to them or put it beside them to take to the other side. A vigil is a time to remember, give gratitude, honor, and respect. I believe that loving thoughts and prayers help people to cross over. I think that the dead are present during the vigil, and it's time for them to accept the death and say their goodbyes too. So a good death for me is one where there's closure. I know that there's layers to that, but my experience has been that engaging in the funeral process helps me to move forward. Sharing the experience with others, sharing stories, laughing, eating, and being a part of the community that the deceased walked through life with does all those things for me. So I love being able to linger. I think it's so much more healing and personal than dip in and out of a timed event for a viewing and then the funeral. There's no clock ticking in a vigil. After the vigil comes a funeral. I love that you can personalize this too. You don't have to have a funeral in a church that you didn't go to and didn't really believe in. You don't have to have a stranger officiate for you. You can make all those choices. You can decide if there's music and what music. You can decide who's going to speak or let everyone speak. If you want to have a religious or spiritual ritual to honor and close the life, to call in the ancestors to take your loved one home, or just wish for a safe passage, you can do all of that. Or ask the person of your choice to do that. I'd make it personal. This is your funeral or the funeral of your loved one. It should reflect their life and your relationship. And of course, there is the burial or cremation. One reason for choosing a green burial following a home funeral is a care for the environment. Did you know that every non-green cemetery where embalmed bodies are buried are essentially toxic waste dumps? Yeah. You can't use that land for anything else because of the chemicals that are in the body and the metal from the caskets and the concrete and the vault. In a traditional cemetery, you also have to have a vault to keep the grounds perfectly level. Otherwise, the ground would have dips in it over time, so it wouldn't be so pretty. And that vault is not eco-friendly either. Neither are the chemicals that they put on the grass to keep it lush and green. So none of this happens in a green cemetery. You might be interested to know that the soft tissues decay in about 2 years, and it takes about 20 years for the bones to decay, but you don't get to mark your spot with a headstone, and that's your spot for eternity with a green burial. You return to from where you came. It's ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So read your contract. The land will be reused by other dead people, but since you don't have a headstone, you may not know exactly where your loved one was buried anyway, especially if it was a long time ago. The price of a green cemetery or a hybrid, where the cemetery has some conventional burials and the green section is pretty similar. So think about all of this before you decide what works for you. What are your values? If you want to go natural, you have a lot of different biodegradable options. There's a plain pine box, a wicker basket, a bamboo casket, or a shroud with a board to carry the deceased. I have 2 favorite options. I like the plain cardboard coffin. I like this because you can use it like a cast. You know how when someone gets a cast and people sign it, you can do the same thing with this plain cardboard coffin. You could paint it the person's favorite color and then have everyone sign it, or write a joke, or write a goodbye letter, or paint a picture. It makes it very personal and hands-on. If you don't like that, you can customize a cardboard box, which is also personal but less engaging. My other favorite option is the shroud. I think there's something very dignified and natural about being buried in a shroud. If you want to go very simple, you can go with something inexpensive like muslin, bamboo, or cotton. If you want to be fancy, you can get silk. This is becoming a lot more common, and there are so many more places to get these today than there were just 5 years ago. Prices have gone up for some things, but mostly they've gone down because there are so many more providers of products and services. With a home funeral, instead of having a person in a refrigerator at the funeral home until the viewing, they'll be at your house. In the old days, this is what everyone did. They had the deceased laid out in the parlor or living area, and this is why mortuary businesses are called funeral parlors. Today, we lay the deceased out on dry ice. You don't have to worry about smells or anything like that. There's no smell. It's perfectly fine. There are some safety precautions, like you have to wear gloves when you're handling the dry ice because it can cause skin burns or frostbite. You have to keep the area well ventilated, so keeping the body fresh is the biggest concern that people ask me about, so this is not a big deal. You can rest easy. People also want to know whether the dead will look horrible when they're dead. And I've heard that people say that the dead looks ashen or blue or gray, and this is why they put makeup on them. If you're going to go natural, I'd avoid the makeup. I've seen dead people and they don't look horrible. They look natural. I keep it natural so you know what to expect when it's your turn to die. Dead people aren't monsters. It's fine without makeup, but that's up to you. You can do what you want with that. In the movie Departures, there's a scene about makeup that's very moving, so there's no right or wrong. Just do what makes you feel fantastic, and keep in mind that the longer you delay, the more changes that will occur with the body. We're also afraid of death because we don't see it. Like in the movie, the more we engage with it, the more natural it all becomes. Now, home funerals aren't for everyone. You probably shouldn't be thinking about this if you don't have the space. That's a practical matter. If you live in an apartment with roommates or in a nursing home or don't have a private space, you can't really do it. If you live in a tiny home, you're not going to be able to accommodate guests. And this is not to say you can't do it, I want to die at home. So maybe I die at home and someone has agreed to do the funeral at their house. That'll work, but you have to have some space to have a home funeral. Now, there's some cultural or religious considerations. For example, Jewish people have to be buried within 24 hours. Muslims have to be buried as soon as possible. So there's no vigil with the body. With Jews, this is because they believe that the spirit cannot rest or move on until it is laid to rest. And I want to share this because it's a common belief in the animist world as well. Embalming is not necessary at all unless there's some reason why you need to preserve the body for a while, like the deceased is on the West Coast and is flying to the East Coast for burial, or it's a political figure and the body lays in state where large numbers of people will see it for a while. So that could be another reason. If you have a situation like this, green embalming fluid now exists. So you can do this and have a green funeral. It's an invasive procedure, though, and I personally would avoid anything that damages the body unless it's completely necessary. I hear a lot of people say that funerals don't matter. They matter a great deal to the living and the dead. They help with acceptance, grief, and healing for the living. They help the dead with passage to the other side. There are many books about the process of dying as seen through different traditions, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It may not be an instantaneous process, but our prayers, grief, attention, and love and care of the body matters. This is why it was such an affront in the Trojan War when Achilles dragged Hector's body around the city of Troy. Achilles kept Hector's body for 12 days before he allowed Hector's father to ransom it because he was full of rage. He wanted to punish Hector after death. So, lovingly caring for all the dead and burying them quickly is important. Okay, back to who shouldn't have a home funeral. I got sidetracked there. If you have a certain medical conditions, this may not be possible. If you're sick and you want a home funeral, talk to your death doula or home funeral guide, not your mortician, because they might not know. This is what I would do. So I'm a home funeral guide, and they can talk to you specifically about your conditions. The other reason to not have a home funeral is family. I'm painting a lovely, supportive, warm picture of a vigil and a funeral, but if your family is high conflict, if some of them have one faith and others have another, if there's no clear instructions of how the deceased person wanted their passing to go, they're fighting about money. It's probably not the time to go natural. It goes against the mainstream, and this might not be the time to introduce ideas that might be really off the wall to some people. There's already so much going on with emotions and expenses that it's not the best time to start innovating. If you want to avoid that fight, you need an advanced death care directive. This is a document that tells everyone what you want before you die, so there's no question. Here are the highlights of what this is and what it should contain. Okay, first, you want to appoint an agent. This is a trusted person who will carry out your directive. You may have heard of an advanced healthcare directive. This is basically a medical power of attorney. This person makes your medical decisions should you become incapacitated and can't do it for yourself. The advanced death care directive takes care of handling the business of your death. These can be the same people or different people, but this is a legally binding document. So if you anticipate that your next of kin won't respect your wishes, it's a good idea to get advanced death care directive. Well, even if you do think your wishes will be honored, I would still have it all written down so there's no confusion. It's really emotionally taxing when you're the person in charge and are proceeding with no direction. Just so you know, if you don't name someone, your legal next of kin is your parent or legal guardian if you're a minor. If you're an adult, it's your spouse. And if you don't have a spouse, but you have adult age kids, your next of kin are your kids. If you have no spouse and no kids, your next of kin are your parents. No kids, no spouse, and no parents. The next of kin are your adult siblings or grandparents. And if you want to make sure someone trusted is in charge, write it down. All right. You want to have an after-death care statement which says who will take care of your body. Is this family or friends? A funeral home? You're donating your body to science? Or you don't want your body prepared, preserved, or viewed? That's a legitimate choice. This is your last power on earth. It should be what you want. You want a statement about what you want for a funeral or a memorial service. Do you want the whole church thing? Do you want a quick burial or cremation and a memorial service later? How about a living funeral before you die? Or no service at all?
Love the vibe? Join the tribe. It's free, and the link is in the show notes. See you there.
How do you want your remains to be disposed of? Do you want to go mainstream with a traditional burial, a green burial? I didn't go into this a whole lot, but a green burial means that no chemicals or metals or non-biodegradable things go in the ground. So no embalming unless it's green embalming. No pacemakers, no metal caskets. And it really depends on the cemetery. So you need to ask because some of them do chemo, some of them don't do chemo. You need to ask. So do you want to splash out and go for a mausoleum? Do you want a burial at sea? I think that's a pretty cool option. There are two types of cremation. There's the fire type that most people know about, but there's also a water cremation where your remains are basically dissolved in acid, and it's called alkaline hydrolysis. Do you want to try human composting? Maybe you have no option and you want to leave that to your agent. Let them know. It can give them so much peace to do what you wanted for that one last time. Get into details. If you have a preferred funeral home, officiant, music, flowers, or whatever, say it. Do you want an autopsy? This will delay the funeral by about a month. If you are totally against autopsy, you might state that as well. If you're sick or old, you might include instructions about what to do if you die in the hospital or hospice. Do you want your body washed and prepared at the hospital or taken home first? That kind of thing, do you want makeup? Do you want to be laid in honor wearing your wedding dress? Do you have a favorite pair of pajamas or just you want the shroud? Whatever your wishes you have should be included in the directive. If there are people you want present, people you don't want present, it's up to you. If you already made arrangements with a mortuary or cemetery, you need to let your agent know who those businesses are. If you're a member of the military and costs will be assumed by the VA, you need to let your agent know. Believe it or not, people fight over ashes. It's helpful to state who you want to have ashes and how you want them distributed. I'd also include where you want them scattered. If you write it down, people can't fight the agent over it. If you have thoughts about a headstone, want to be buried next to someone, don't want to be buried next to someone, or thought about maximum or minimum amount of money you spend on something, let your agent know. These can be really difficult decisions to make in a tiny amount of time that you have to make them for someone else while trying to grieve. I'd also include a list of people to contact, especially if they aren't obvious. Include phone numbers and emails. Some people write their own obituary. If you want one and have an idea of where it should be posted, let your agent know. If you have a burial policy and will, let your agent know. The agent may or may not be your administrator, but it will help the administrator if the information about the will is communicated. Rather than let people guess if it exists and where it is, file it with your local courthouse. I've heard too many stories about people disposing of the will to put themselves at an advantage, to trust that my will is going to be found and executed the way that I want. People are cool when you're alive, but when someone dies and there's money or emotions, they can turn into different people. Make it easy and create a will and file it at the courthouse where it can't be destroyed. Now, if you want your organs donated, let your agent and next of kin know. This is a call that is going to come very shortly after you pass, and it could be a shock if the conversation wasn't discussed beforehand. So I'd research organ donation and make sure that you can make an informed choice about that. You might want to share some facts and memories about your life to make it easier for the person who's going to do the eulogy to share. I actually created a journal called the Storykeeper's Journal that's perfect for this. Now, I wanted to hear my dad's stories while he was still alive, so I created it for him for Father's Day so I could have them all in one place. And it takes a while to compile and remember all of those things, so it's a good way for anyone to share themselves and just review their own lives. While you're at it, I'd create a death file for your administrator that contains a copy of your will, bank information, investments, retirement accounts, real estate documents, any legal documents, driver's license, social security number, copies of marriage or divorce certificates, any revolving accounts that you have, like the phone bill, credit card bills, and anything with a monthly payment. You have any personal letters that you'd like to send? I'd put those in there as well. And don't forget to sign this in front of a notary and tell people that it exists so it's not a surprise when someone pops up and says, hey, I'm the representative of the deceased person, and nobody's ever heard it before. People can become strangers when someone dies, so the more you communicate, the better. If all this sounds daunting, there's a podcast coming up on Christmas Day about death doula services. A death doula can help with doing all your pre-funeral planning and all your pre-dying planning. A home funeral facilitator can help with preparing the body for visitation, keeping the body cool, getting the necessary legal documents like the burial permit, transportation, and death certificate. Most will be able to also help plan and officiate funeral rituals or ceremonies. This is a professional service. People have to take time away from their lives to do this, but you don't have to hire someone. You can definitely do it all yourself. It just helps to have support when you have so much going on. And there's even now a natural death, what would you call it? Funeral homes. So let's say that you want to have the natural death, but you don't want to do it in your home. There are natural death funeral directors now. They're few and far between, but they do exist. Death is a part of life. It can be a magical and beautiful part if you put some thought and planning into it. I think a lot of people want to die at home. They want to be loved and cared for after death by their family. It's the last time together and that last act of intimacy. Beautiful endings lead to beautiful beginnings. So I hope that your send-off and those of your loved ones can be conscious, peaceful, and love-filled. I like to keep things light and sparkly, and your transition from this world can be that with a bit of planning. I know we don't think of death as a uniting or intimate experience, but it certainly can be. I believe that walking with dignity in death is a way of living well. And that's what we're all here to do. And I hope today's podcast was useful. If so, let me know with a comment or a like. And if you have questions about dying, that's next week. I'm going to be talking with Tracy Reed, the death doula. So be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss it. And I'll see you then. Thanks for being here. Ciao.
Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Spotify so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, why not show your love with a review? Thanks. See you next week.